From the moment I could understand words, I knew I was different, not in the way that sparks pride, but in the way that makes you shrink into corners. In my family, love wasn't a shared meal or an even playing field. It was a spotlight, and Ryan stood right in the center of it. I was just the shadow that made him shine brighter. I still remember that Christmas when I was 7. Ryan tore open the biggest box under the tree and screamed with joy at the sight of the latest gaming console. My mom clapped, filming his reaction like she was capturing history. I sat cross-legged, watching heart fluttering with tiny hopes. Then came my turn. A soft package inside a gray t-shirt with a plumbing company logo, tag still on, $3.99, 2 sizes too big. My mom smiled, said, "Sweetie, Ryan's older. He needs more important things. You should learn to be content." So I learned. Learned to clap when he won, to smile when he bragged to disappear, when it made things easier. For Ryan's 16th birthday, they threw an outdoor bash with a live band and gifted him a brand new Ford. Half the town showed up for mine. 2 friends frozen pizza and a ballpoint pen from a job fair. My dad told me, "You're practical. You don't need anything fancy." When Ryan went to college, my parents paid his tuition in full, plus a monthly allowance. I got a pile of loan forms and a lecture on independence. They never asked if I had groceries, if I was safe, if I was exhausted from back-to-back shifts. I thought maybe if I just kept working harder one day, they'd notice. They never did. At graduation, Ryan got a backyard celebration with champagne, a 3-tier cake, and a starter home in the suburbs. I walked into our dining room to find takeout burgers and my parents waiting with a white envelope inside a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. "Just for fun," my mom chirped. "Maybe you'll hit it big." I smiled, hollow-tired, not even angry anymore, just numb. That night, I packed my chipped red suitcase some clothes, a laptop with a dying battery, and left. No tears, no goodbyes. I rented a shoebox apartment in downtown Cincinnati, where sirens and car horns replaced the quiet contempt I'd grown up with. The walls were stained, the heat barely worked, and the neighbors argued through paper-thin plaster. But it was mine. I wasn't compared to Ryan there. I wasn't told to be grateful for clearance clothes or expected to cheer for someone else's life. I worked 2 jobs, marketing assistant by day, bakery staff by night. I came home with flour in my hair, grease on my hands, and sore feet that pulsed through my bones, but I felt lighter than I ever had under my parents' roof. In the family group chat, yes, I was still technically included. Nothing changed. Photo after photo of Ryan smiling in his new suits. Ryan with his new girlfriend Ryan in their freshly remodeled kitchen. I once replied, "Hope everyone's doing okay." No one answered. A couple of emojis, that was it. And that lottery ticket still sat untouched in the drawer by the stove, buried under coins, expired coupons, and a leaky pen. A cruel joke, a reminder that to them I was just a maybe, a scratch-off chance instead of a real investment. Some nights I'd pass that drawer and run my fingers across the edge of the ticket, not because I thought it held a miracle, but because it reminded me why I left. Then one Friday at a coworker's party, a girl from the creative team named Marissa asked me why I never talked about my family. I paused, then said, maybe because they never really saw me as part of it. She didn't flinch, just nodded, and in that tiny moment I felt seen, really seen. That night I opened the drawer, took out the ticket, not to hope, not to dream, but to prove to myself that I was worth at least one chance. Even if I had to give it to myself, I grabbed a coin and scratched. I didn't cry when I left home. Not because I wasn't hurting, but because there was nothing worth staying for. I had hoped that my college graduation would be a milestone, a moment that would finally make them see me differently. But instead, Ryan was celebrated with confetti, a 3-tiered cake, and a brand new home in the suburbs, while I received a box of fast food, 2 indifferent faces, and a plain white envelope. Inside was a $2 lottery ticket. "Just for fun," my mother said with a grin, as if it were the most charming joke in the world. I smiled a hollow, empty smile. Not because I was angry. I had long passed anger. What remained was a kind of numbness. That night, I packed up my chipped red suitcase, a few sets of clothes, a cracked old laptop, and what little hope I had left, I left without a word. No one called to ask where I was going. No one tried to stop me. The apartment I rented in Cincinnati was so small I could touch 3 walls just by stretching out my arms. The heater groaned every time I turned it on. The walls were stained, and arguments from the next unit came through like whispers in my own room. But at least it was mine. No one called me ungrateful there. No one compared me to Ryan. No one looked at me and thought, "She's just Lena, I worked 2 jobs." By day, I was a marketing assistant at a small ad agency. By night, I mopped floors and boxed pastries at a bakery near the market. I came home every night with aching legs, flour in my hair, and the smell of butter on my hands. But I felt lighter than I ever had in my parents' house. I was still technically in the family group chat, but it was like being a ghost. Everything revolved around Ryan. Ryan in his new suit. Ryan with his new car. Ryan and Emma vacationing in Florida. Once I sent a message. Hope. Everyone's doing okay. The response. A couple of lifeless emojis. That was it. One time I opened the kitchen drawer and saw the lottery ticket my mother gave me. It was still there, tucked under some coins and a dried-up pin. I didn't know why I kept it. Maybe because it symbolized everything I'd always suspected deep down to them. I was just a possibility. A maybe instead of someone worth investing in. Then, one Friday night at a small office party, a girl named Marissa sat next to me at the dessert table. After a bit of small talk, she tilted her head and asked Lena, "How come you never talk about your family?" I paused for a moment and replied honestly, "Because they never really saw me as part of it." She didn't look uncomfortable. She didn't pity me. She just nodded. And in that moment, that silence free of judgment, I felt seen for the first time. That night, I came home and opened the drawer. I took out the lottery ticket. Not because I hoped to become rich. Not because I wanted a sports car or a mansion, but because I wanted to give myself a chance. Not anyone else. Not my parents. Not fate. Just me. I laid the ticket on the table, pulled out my phone, and opened the Ohio Lottery website. My heart wasn't pounding with excitement. It was calm, steady. I was ready to close a chapter. As I scratched off the silver coating, the numbers slowly appeared. 8, 14, 27, 7, 33, 42, 56. I looked at the screen. Flashing in bold letters were the words, "Congratulations, you've won the jackpot. 134 million." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't rush onto the balcony like people in movies. I just sat there, hands trembling, eyes wide, alone. And for the first time in my life, I thought maybe I wasn't just the extra piece after all. I didn't sleep that night. The numbers kept flashing in my mind. Not just on the screen. I sat there back, stiff in the kitchen chair, my fingers still curled around the edge of the table like I was holding onto the moment, afraid it might vanish, but it didn't. The jackpot was real, the win was real, and the freedom it promised, that was the part that scared me most. I'd never had that kind of power before. The next morning, I took the day off from both jobs, called in sick to one simply didn't show up to the other. I wasn't ready to say it aloud, but something had shifted inside me. I made a pot of coffee, sat in my worn-out robe, and started researching. What to do when you win the lottery, pulled up thousands of hits. But most of them said the same thing in bold, urgent letters. Don't tell anyone. Stay anonymous. Hire professionals. That advice sounded more like a warning than a suggestion. I listened. It didn't take long to find Monica. Her name came up on every trusted list, always mentioned with words like discreet, sharp, and no nonsense. She had an office on the 19th floor of a sleek glass building I used to walk past every day on my way to work. Never dreaming I'd have a reason to go inside, I emailed her from a burner account. She replied within an hour and scheduled me for the next morning. I almost backed out. The thought of holding that kind of truth in front of a stranger felt too heavy. But I showed up anyway. Her office smelled like peppermint tea and professionalism. There was no fake cheer, no patronizing tone. Monica looked me in the eye and said, "This isn't magic, it's money. If you want it to work for you, we do this right." I handed her the ticket and my life began to change. Over the next few hours, she built a fortress around my identity. I would claim the winnings through an LLC with a generic name. Everything bank accounts, property purchases, legal paperwork would be routed through that entity. She brought in a tax attorney and an investment consultant who both treated me like a client, not a fluke of luck. We worked out a plan that prioritized stability, privacy, and long-term growth. When the transfer finally came through, the number on the check made my hands sweat $85 million after taxes. I sat in a quiet conference room holding an envelope that weighed less than a pound, but felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I didn't feel joy. Not exactly. I felt clarity. It was like someone had wiped a foggy window clean. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. I moved out of the apartment 2 weeks later. Quietly, without notice, I didn't leave a forwarding address. I found a small house in a quiet suburb just outside the city. Nothing flashy, just clean and calm, with a porch that faced the sunrise and maple trees that would turn red in the fall. I bought a used hybrid sedan under the company name, signed up for a grocery delivery service, and took a deep breath. No headlines, no suspicious neighbors, no more bakery shifts or clunky subway rides. I kept the marketing job for a while, partly because it gave me structure, partly because it helped me pretend everything was normal, but I knew that version of my life was ending. The only job I quit immediately was the bakery. I left a handwritten thank you note for the owner and a check to help her upgrade her ovens. It was the softest goodbye I'd ever said. Every day I woke up in a house that didn't echo with criticism. I made breakfast in a kitchen where no one watched over my shoulder. I sat on the porch and drank coffee without glancing at my phone to see who was getting praised in the family chat. Slowly the knots in my chest began to loosen. I wasn't afraid of being overlooked anymore. I wasn't afraid of being nothing. I framed the lottery ticket and hung it by my desk, not as a symbol of luck, but as a declaration that no matter what they saw or failed to see in me, I had built this life with my own hands, and I was just getting started. For a while, it was quiet, blissfully, cautiously quiet. I woke up with the sun slipping through the linen curtains, brewed my coffee in a kitchen that smelled like orange peel and peace, and watched sparrows pick at the feeder in my backyard. Some mornings I forgot about the money entirely. Other days, I let the reality of it settle slowly like warmth spreading through my chest. I had stopped checking the family group chat. I no longer flinched when my phone buzzed. I had created a new number for anything official, and no one in my family had it. My days were mine now, quiet, full, and untouched. But peace, I've learned, is rarely permanent when your name is still floating around in someone else's story. It started with a neighborhood post. My Tesla Pearl White, registered under the company, had been spotted by someone in the community who fancied themselves an amateur detective. New neighbor alert, the caption read next to a photo of my car parked in front of my mailbox, which embarrassingly still bore a temporary sticker L King. Beneath it, a thread of speculation exploded. Someone joked about me being a crypto millionaire. Another offered free coffee to whoever could figure out what I did for a living. I laughed it off at first, but then Chloe messaged me, Chloe, my old college roommate. She'd seen the photo and texted Lena, "Is that really you in Edgewood? If so, wow." My chest tightened. I hadn't heard from Chloe in years, but she wasn't the problem. The problem came 2 days later when I saw the missed calls from Mom. 3 back-to-back I didn't answer. Then came the text from Zach, my cousin. "Your mom's freaking out. She thinks you came into money. Did something happen?" My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I considered replying with something sharp, something cold, but I didn't. I knew what was coming. Once suspicion took root, it spread fast in my family, and they didn't care about truth. They only cared about what they could take from it. 2 mornings later, as I watered the lavender bushes by the fence, a black SUV slowed to a stop in front of my house. I knew the car. The windows rolled down. Ryan was in the driver's seat. Mom sat beside him, sunglasses perched on her head, her expression a mixture of curiosity and something else I couldn't quite name. They didn't try to hide. They stared at the house like they were appraising it. I stepped behind the tree, heart pounding not from fear, but from fury. They had never shown up for my birthdays, never visited me in college, but the moment they sniffed out wealth, they came running. They didn't get out. Ryan said something to Mom, then pulled away, but I stood there long after the SUV disappeared, the tire dust still hanging in the air like a warning. That night, I received the first text Sweetheart Mom wrote. We'd love to visit sometime, just to catch up. I didn't respond. A few days passed, then another. Your favorite stew this Sunday. Come for dinner, and then the one that made my stomach turn. Family is forever. Lena, no matter what. Each message dripped with sugar, but I could taste the calculation behind it. I didn't block her. Not yet. I wanted to see how far they'd go. And then, 2 weeks after the drive-by, Ryan called. I stared at his name on the screen for a long moment before answering. His voice was fake, cheerful. "Hey, stranger. Mom's been really upset. You're ignoring us. She cried last night. I waited. The next line came right on cue. So, Emma and I are getting married. Ceremonies this spring. Thought you should hear it from me." I said nothing. "We're having a family dinner this weekend," he continued. "You should come. Everyone will be there. Just for fun. We're still family, right?" I agreed. Not because I missed them. Not because I believed them, but because I needed to see it for myself, what they really wanted. And this time, I wasn't walking into their house as the forgotten daughter. I was walking in as a ghost come back to life, one they could no longer ignore. The house looked exactly the same. Same white picket fence, same cracked stone walkway. Even the old porch swing was still creaking gently in the breeze, like it had been waiting for me this whole time. But I wasn't the girl who used to sit on that swing, hoping for someone to see her. I parked across the street and took a slow breath before walking up the steps. My stomach didn't twist, my hands didn't shake. I wasn't nervous, I was observant. Mom opened the door, smiling too wide. "You're so skinny," she said, hugging me just a second too long before pulling away and heading to the kitchen without waiting for a reply. Dad gave a short nod from the living room, as if I'd just returned from a weekend trip. Not years of silence. Ryan greeted me like we were old buddies catching up at a college reunion, overly familiar, overly loud. "Glad you made it, sis." The table was set for 6, though no one mentioned who the 6th person was supposed to be. Emma wasn't there yet, apparently. The food was nice. Too nice. They hadn't put this much effort into dinner since Ryan's graduation party. We sat, we ate, and as I expected, the entire conversation revolved around Ryan. The wedding venue, the guest list, the color scheme. Dad went on about his plans to remodel the backyard. Mom gushed over Emma's dress. I listened, chewed, nodded. I didn't add a thing I didn't need to. They barely noticed. Then dessert came out, and with it, the real reason I was invited. Mom tapped her spoon against her glass. That soft clink was the signal. "I have something to say," she began, her eyes flicking to me and then back to Ryan. Ryan and Emma are very excited about the wedding, as you can imagine. But as you know, planning a proper ceremony and preparing the house so they can move in after is a lot of work and cost. She smiled sweetly, folding her napkin in her lap as though we were discussing something as light as curtain colors. "We thought maybe since you're doing so well now, you could help out a little. Nothing big, around $100,000 would cover the new garage and some of the wedding expenses." Dad nodded like it was already settled. Ryan leaned back, looking pleased. "I mean, come on," he said, chuckling. "We're family, right? Helping each other when it matters should be a given." I set my fork down and looked at each of them in turn. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I wasn't even surprised. I was calm, crystal clear. "Family," I repeated softly. Where was family when I was working 2 jobs to survive college, when I was skipping meals just to pay my rent, when I got sick and couldn't afford to go to the doctor? Where were you then? No one answered. I turned to Mom. "What was it you said to me back then?" "Oh, right. There's nothing stopping you from working harder." I smiled. "Well, I did, and I didn't do it so I could bankroll your backyard or your son's second honeymoon." The room went quiet. Even Ryan's smirk faded. I stood up, picked up my purse. "You know, I used to hope you'd see me, that maybe one day I'd be enough for this family, but not anymore." I turned to Ryan steady. "And if you really want that garage, no one's stopping you from working harder." I walked out. The air outside felt cooler than I remembered, lighter somehow. As I reached the sidewalk, I realized something had finally settled inside me. A door, old splintered and aching, had quietly closed. This time, I didn't look back. I drove home in silence, no music, no podcasts, just the soft hum of the tires on the road and the wind slipping in through the slightly cracked window. In the rearview mirror, the glow of my childhood home blurred behind me like a memory I no longer needed to hold on to. When I got home, I stepped out of my shoes, sat on the edge of the couch, and exhaled. Not with sadness, not even with relief, just peace. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilt. I just breathed for the first time in my life without the weight of needing to prove I belonged to anyone. The next morning, the messages came in like a flood. First from Mom. "What did you mean by that? I never treated you any differently. Family always comes first." "You really hurt me, Lena." Then from Ryan, "I don't even know who you are anymore. It was just a little help." "You acted like a stranger." I stared at the screen, then quietly placed the phone in a drawer and turned the key. I had heard those lines my entire life. The only difference now was I didn't believe them anymore. My days began on my terms. No alarm unless I wanted one. No rigid schedule. No need to explain my existence. I started each morning with a fresh mug of coffee sitting on my porch as the sunlight spilled across the lawn. I began to write, not for money, not for recognition, but because I finally had something to say, and more importantly, the space to say it. I started drafting stories I had carried inside me for years, stories about small heroes, quiet strength, girls who didn't need to be loud to be powerful. With Monica's help, I invested in a few small projects, a local coffee startup, a tech program for underserved schools, and an independent publishing house that had once rejected me when I submitted a short story back in college. This time, I didn't need their approval. I bought 40% of the company and asked for nothing more than creative freedom and a seat at the table. I also picked up the ukulele again, a silly dream from high school that I was once told was impractical and a waste of time. I practiced slowly fumbling at first, but each chord felt like a small rebellion against the voice in my head that had always whispered, "You're not the one they chose." The house began to reflect me, not who I was supposed to be, but who I actually was. I planted lavender along the back fence. I added a small reading swing under the oak tree. I built a tall bookshelf in the living room and filled it with novels I once borrowed from the library in secret, back when every dollar counted. Each book I placed on the shelf felt like a line drawn in the sand between who I had been and who I had become. Then one day, as I watered the herb garden, the doorbell rang. On the step was a plain white envelope. No return address. Inside was an old photo, me Ryan, Mom and Dad at Lake Erie, smiling beneath a cloudy sky. On the back, a single sentence written in my mother's familiar script. "No matter where you are, home is still home." I didn't cry. I didn't even sigh. I folded the photo gently and placed it in the drawer by the fireplace. I didn't rip it up. I didn't display it either. I simply let it exist like a stone on the shoreline, something shaped by time but no longer able to hurt me. A week later, I received an invitation to an art exhibition in Columbus. One of the children's stories I had written, a short tale called Little Moon, had been selected for illustration and display in the New Voices section. I drove alone. Soft jazz playing from the car's speakers, a quiet thrill blooming in my chest. No one clapped when I walked into the gallery. No one took pictures. But as I stood there in front of my story framed and glowing under soft museum lights, I felt something close to wholeness. After the exhibit, I sat in a cafe down the street, jotting ideas into a leather notebook. A little girl at the next table kept staring. Finally, she walked over and asked shyly, "Are you the one who wrote Little Moon?" I nodded and she lit up. I really love that story. "You're a great writer," that single sentence spoken by someone with no stake in my past. No expectations, no baggage warmed a place in me. I hadn't known was still cold. I thanked her, smiled, and returned to my table. For once, I had nothing left to prove, no one left to impress. I wasn't chasing validation anymore. I had stepped out of the invisible cage they built around me and into a life that was finally mine. A life defined not by applause, but by peace. Not by revenge, but by the quiet power of choosing who I wanted to become. It happened on a Saturday. I was standing in line at my favorite organic bakery waiting for my usual order, a rosemary scone and a cup of black coffee. I had just finished a walk through the farmer's market, still carrying a small bouquet of sunflowers under one arm. My life had folded into a rhythm so quiet, so unassuming, I barely noticed how far I'd come. And then I heard it, Lena. I turned, and there he was, Ryan. Same broad shoulders, same slightly too casual clothes, but something was different. The smugness was gone. His eyes looked tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that comes from the weight of knowing, of realizing too late. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Didn't expect to see you here. You live around this area." I nodded close by. He gestured awkwardly at the counter. "Just picking up pastries for Emma. She's pregnant with our second." He paused, then added, "Mom still talks about you all the time." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left to say. After a moment, he shifted his voice, dropping to something quieter. "You know, sometimes I think this world just isn't fair." I looked at him, really looked. There was no fire behind my eyes, no triumph, just calm clarity. I tilted my head. "You're right. Life isn't fair, but I learned how to make it fair for myself." Ryan's mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Whatever he wanted to say, whatever he used to think he had the right to say, he held it back. Maybe he finally understood that I wasn't the same sister who sat quietly through birthday dinners pretending not to be hurt. Maybe he knew I'd stopped needing their recognition. Or maybe he just didn't know how to face someone who had outgrown the version of her they'd built. The barista called my name. I took my order and turned to him one last time. "I really do wish you the best," I said, and meant it. Then I walked out. Outside. The sunlight spread across the sidewalk like a quiet celebration. I walked slowly, steadily, my bag warm against my hand, not rushing, not hiding, just being. That night, I sat on my porch with a mug of chamomile tea. The stars shimmered above, distant but comforting. The lavender plants rustled in the wind. I thought of all the years I spent trying to earn something that was never mine to begin with. Love. Conditional on convenience, attention traded like currency. I used to believe I was just a lesser version of someone else, that my worth needed to be proven. But now I knew better. I wasn't a mistake. I wasn't a backup. I wasn't a ghost. I was Lena Quiet, steady, unapologetically whole. The victories in my life didn't come with fireworks or applause. They came in the form of freedom. Freedom from old expectations, from being measured against someone who was never meant to define me. I didn't need revenge that scorched the earth. I didn't need them to grovel. What I needed, I had already built a life rooted in self-worth, a future I had created with my own hands. Months passed like breath, gentle and full. I invested in a cabin in Vermont where I could write for weeks without interruption. I spent time in Oregon under oak trees and in Santa Barbara sipping coffee by the shore. My days were quiet, yes, but never empty, and the best part, I didn't need anyone to witness it. Success, I learned, is sweetest when it doesn't come from proving someone wrong, but from proving to yourself that they never had the right to define you in the first place. So if anyone asked about me, about what happened to the girl who was always left out, always overlooked, I'd simply smile and say, she lived. Truly, finally, and freely, she lived.